Cayce's forbidden reading. What happens if you die in your sleep? It was 3:17 in the morning when Edgar Cayce's eyes snapped open. His wife Gertrude would later describe the sound that escaped his throat as something between a gasp and a prayer. His body trembled beneath the thin cotton sheet, and for the first time in 40 years of psychic readings, America's most documented psychic refused to speak about what he had witnessed. For weeks, he remained silent about that session. When pressed by his closest associates at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Cayce would only whisper, "Some knowledge carries a weight too heavy for unprepared souls." What had he seen in the Akashic Records that night? What revelation about the nature of death had shaken even the sleeping prophet himself? The reading had begun like thousands of others, a simple request for guidance about a soul's transition. But this time, Cayce's consciousness had been pulled deeper into the borderland between life and death than ever before. He witnessed something that challenged every assumption about what happens when consciousness departs the body during sleep. Tonight, you're going to discover what terrified Edgar Cayce. You're going to learn why this knowledge was hidden away in the ARE archives, accessible only to those deemed spiritually prepared to receive it. Because what Cayce saw that night wasn't just about death. It was about the most profound mystery of human existence, the sacred journey that every soul must eventually take, and why dying in sleep might be the greatest gift a soul can give to itself and those it loves. The knowledge you're about to receive has been whispered in mystery schools for millennia. It's been guarded by mystics and sages who understood that truth, like medicine, must be administered in the right dose to the right heart at the right time. Are you ready to step into the forbidden chambers of consciousness where Edgar Cayce once trembled? Are you prepared to understand what happens when the silver cord that binds soul to flesh finally dissolves in the quiet hours of night? For over 4 decades, Edgar Cayce had served as a bridge between the seen and unseen worlds. His documented readings healed thousands, revealed past lives, and opened doorways to cosmic understanding that medicine and science are only beginning to comprehend. Yet in all those years, through all those thousands of sessions, Cayce explored the mystery of sleep-death transitions only 12 times. 12 sessions that left him so profoundly shaken that he locked away the transcripts and warned his inner circle about the dangers of unprepared minds encountering such knowledge. What made these readings different from all the others? In one preserved case from the ARE archives, a grieving mother had asked Cayce to follow her infant son's consciousness as it departed during sleep. What Cayce witnessed in that reading changed his understanding of death forever. He described seeing the baby's soul pause at what he called the threshold of return, hovering between worlds with a choice that would determine not just its own destiny, but the spiritual evolution of its entire family line. The mother pressed for more details, but Cayce, still in trance, began to weep. The knowledge, it carries responsibility, his unconscious voice whispered. To know the mechanics of death is to become accountable for the manner of living. This was Cayce's greatest fear, not death itself, but the weight of understanding that came with seeing behind the veil. He realized that once a soul comprehends the sacred nature of the death process, every moment of life becomes a conscious preparation for that ultimate transition. His associates noticed changes in Cayce after these forbidden readings. He became more gentle, more present, as if carrying some profound secret that colored every interaction with sacred significance. He spoke often of sleep as the little death, a nightly rehearsal for the soul's eventual permanent departure from physical form. Dr. Wesley Ketchum, who worked closely with Cayce, noted in his private journals that the sleeping prophet seemed to age differently after these sessions. not with weariness, but with a luminous quality that some described as becoming transparent to eternity. But why did Cayce limit these explorations to only 12 sessions? The answer lies in what he discovered about the observer effect in spiritual realms. To witness a soul's transition, the psychic consciousness must partially merge with that departing soul's experience. Cayce realized that each time he entered the borderland of death, he was rehearsing his own eventual passage. The knowledge was transformative, but it came with a price. Those who glimpse the sacred mechanics of death can never again live unconsciously. Every breath becomes precious. Every relationship becomes an opportunity for healing. Every moment becomes preparation for the greatest journey the soul will ever take. This understanding, Cayce realized, was why mystery schools throughout history had guarded such knowledge so carefully. It wasn't to keep secrets from humanity, but to protect souls from receiving truth before they were ready to live worthy of such sacred understanding. In his deepest trance states, Cayce discovered something that would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. Sleep and death, he realized, exist not as separate experiences, but as points along the same cosmic spectrum, varying depths of the soul's tide as it ebbs and flows from physical embodiment. Every night when you close your eyes, your consciousness begins a journey that mirrors the final departure it will one day make permanently. The same silver cord that allows your soul to travel in dreams and return to your body each morning will, at the moment of death, simply choose not to snap back. Picture this sacred process. As sleep deepens, your consciousness gently loosens from the dense vibrations of physical matter. It rises through what Cayce called the borderland, that mystical realm between the material and spiritual dimensions, where dreams, visions, and soul communications become possible. In one documented case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce described following a woman's consciousness as she slept. Her soul, he observed, visited her deceased mother, received healing for an old emotional wound, and returned to her body with information that would change her waking life forever. But what struck Cayce most profoundly was how similar this nightly journey appeared to the permanent transition he had witnessed in death. The difference, he realized, was not in the process itself, but in the soul's intention and readiness. During sleep, consciousness ventures out with the understanding that return is expected, necessary, part of the earthly contract still being fulfilled. But when death approaches, the soul begins to sense that this journey outward will be different, a releasing rather than a temporary exploration. Cayce discovered that in the weeks before a peaceful death, the soul begins what he called practice departures. During sleep, consciousness travels further from the body, stays away longer, and begins to loosen the energetic attachments that bind it to physical form. Family members often notice changes. The person sleeps more deeply, dreams more vividly, and sometimes speaks of visits from deceased loved ones. This understanding revealed why dying in sleep is so often described as peaceful. The soul has been rehearsing this departure for weeks, sometimes months. By the time the final transition comes, consciousness has already grown comfortable with the sensation of moving beyond physical boundaries. But Cayce's most startling discovery was that the veil between worlds becomes transparent during these practice departures. Souls preparing for death often gain access to the Akashic Records, receive visions of their life's purpose completion, and sometimes even glimpse the expanded service they'll perform from higher dimensions. This is why many people report profound spiritual experiences in the months before a loved one passes peacefully in sleep. The departing soul, moving more freely between dimensions, becomes a bridge between worlds for their entire family system. According to Cayce's most guarded readings, the process of dying in sleep unfolds through 3 distinct phases: each more sacred and mysterious than the last. These stages represent humanity's most natural and graceful approach to the ultimate transition. The first stage, which Cayce called the gentle withdrawal, begins hours or sometimes days before clinical death. During this phase, consciousness slowly and tenderly untangles itself from the physical nervous system. The soul, sensing its approaching freedom, begins to withdraw its animating life force from the extremities inward, toward the heart and brain centers. Family members often witness this withdrawal without understanding its sacred nature. The person becomes less responsive to physical stimuli, seems to be listening to sounds others cannot hear, or gazes into seemingly empty spaces with expressions of wonder or recognition. They are not losing awareness. They are gaining access to dimensions of consciousness, typically veiled from incarnate souls. In one case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce described an elderly man whose consciousness, during this withdrawal stage, was reuniting with his childhood dog, long deceased. To observers, he appeared to be hallucinating, but Cayce's reading revealed that the man's soul was already beginning to experience the timeless dimension where all relationships continue in their essential form. The second stage, the threshold pause, represents perhaps the most profound moment in any soul's evolutionary journey. Here, suspended between physical and spiritual existence, consciousness reviews what Cayce called the earthly contracts, the soul agreements, karmic balances, and service commitments that comprised this lifetime's spiritual curriculum. This is not the harsh judgment portrayed in some religious traditions, but rather a compassionate review conducted by the soul's own highest wisdom. Every relationship, every challenge, every moment of growth is viewed from the expanded perspective of unconditional love. The soul sees how each experience, even those that seemed painful or meaningless, contributed to its eternal development. But what Cayce witnessed in the third stage, the great release, challenged every conventional understanding of death. Instead of an ending, he observed consciousness expanding into dimensions of existence so vast and luminous that human language becomes inadequate to describe them. The soul doesn't lose its individual identity, but rather discovers that its personal self was always part of a much grander cosmic consciousness. In his most profound reading on this subject, Cayce described watching a grandmother's soul during this final stage. As the great release occurred, he witnessed her consciousness simultaneously existing as her individual self, greeting deceased family members, and as an expanded being of light capable of healing her entire ancestral line across multiple generations. Death, Cayce whispered in that trance state, is birth into the fullness of what the soul has always been but could not express while wearing the costume of flesh. These three stages, he realized, represent not just the mechanics of dying, but the ultimate purpose of human incarnation: to grow in consciousness to the point where the soul can gracefully release physical attachment and graduate into expanded service in higher dimensions. In the space between the threshold pause and the great release, Cayce observed souls entering what he described as the Garden of Review, a luminous realm where every moment of the departing life blooms like living memory, accessible to consciousness in ways impossible during physical incarnation. This garden exists outside linear time, allowing the soul to move freely through the landscapes of its earthly experience. But this is not mere reminiscence. Each memory appears as a living entity, radiating the emotional and spiritual energy that was created during the original experience. Joy sparkles with golden light. Compassion flows like healing streams. Even painful memories appear transformed, revealing the soul growth that emerged from difficult experiences. In one documented case, Cayce described following a woman's soul as she entered this garden after passing peacefully in her sleep. She moved first to memories of her children's laughter, experiencing not just the remembered sound, but the pure love that created those moments of joy. Then to memories of caring for her dying mother, feeling not the exhaustion she had experienced then, but the spiritual strength she had developed through that service. But the Garden of Review holds deeper mysteries. Cayce observed that souls can perceive the ripple effects of their earthly actions extending far beyond what they knew during life. A simple act of kindness to a stranger blooms in the garden as a cascade of healing that touched dozens of lives. A moment of forgiveness appears as a brilliant flower whose fragrance healed ancestral wounds across multiple generations. However, Cayce also witnessed souls becoming trapped in this garden, unable to move forward because they could not embrace the compassionate perspective their higher self was offering. These souls fixated on perceived failures, mistakes they believed were unforgivable, or regrets about words unspoken or paths not taken. The tragedy, Cayce realized, was that from the garden's elevated perspective, these souls could see that every experience, even their perceived failures, had contributed to their eternal development and the growth of those around them. But spiritual evolution requires the soul to choose self-compassion, to embrace its earthly journey with the same unconditional love that divine consciousness holds for all creation. In his most moving reading on this subject, Cayce described an elderly man whose soul had become lost in reviewing a mistake made decades earlier. Harsh words spoken to his son that had created a rift never healed before the son's own death. The soul remained frozen at this memory, unable to see beyond its own self-judgment. But then Cayce witnessed something extraordinary. The son's soul, already established in higher dimensions, appeared in the garden to embrace his father's consciousness. "Father," the son communicated through pure love frequency, "those words taught me forgiveness. Through forgiving you, I learned to forgive myself. Your mistake was my spiritual gift." This is the ultimate purpose of the Garden of Review, Cayce realized. Not punishment or regret, but the soul's opportunity to finally understand the sacred perfection of its earthly journey, even in its imperfections. Judgment comes not from external forces, but from the soul's own capacity for self-compassion and its ability to perceive how every experience served the grand design of eternal growth. Those who learn to navigate this garden with love rather than judgment move gracefully into the great release, carrying with them the integrated wisdom of their entire earthly adventure. No soul dies alone. This was perhaps Cayce's most comforting discovery during his forbidden explorations of the sleep-death transition. In his deepest trance states, he observed that beings of light gather around departing consciousness like cosmic midwives, assisting in the sacred birth from physical existence into expanded spiritual reality. These companions, Cayce revealed, exist in several categories, each serving a unique purpose in the soul's transition. First are the beloved familiar faces, deceased family members, friends, and sometimes even cherished pets, whose souls have been waiting in higher dimensions to welcome their loved one home. These reunions, Cayce observed, occur not after death but during the gentle withdrawal stage, when consciousness is still loosely connected to the physical form. In one preserved case from the ARE archives, Cayce described an elderly woman whose deceased husband appeared beside her hospital bed 3 days before her own peaceful passing. While family members saw only an unconscious patient, Cayce's reading revealed that her soul was already experiencing joyful reunion, reviewing their shared lifetime together from the perspective of eternal love. But even more mysterious are what Cayce called the ancient guides. luminous beings who have watched over the soul throughout its earthly journey, invisible guardians who finally reveal themselves as consciousness prepares for its graduation. These guides often appear as figures of indescribable beauty and wisdom, embodying the highest spiritual principles the departing soul has been learning throughout its incarnation. Perhaps most remarkably, Cayce sometimes observed what he described as future self-companions, advanced aspects of the soul's own consciousness, appearing from dimensions beyond linear time. These beings represent what the soul is becoming through its spiritual evolution, offering comfort and guidance from the perspective of completed development. The presence of these companions serves multiple purposes in the transition process. They provide comfort and reassurance, helping to dissolve any fear or confusion that might arise as consciousness releases from familiar physical boundaries. They also serve as guides through the various stages of departure, offering wisdom about navigating the borderland dimensions and preparing the soul for its expanded existence. But these companions also fulfill a crucial protective function. Cayce discovered that the borderland between a physical and spiritual existence contains what he called lower astral influences, confused souls and entities that might attempt to attach to or mislead a departing consciousness. The presence of loving guides and advanced beings creates what Cayce described as a corridor of light that shields the transitioning soul from these influences. In his most profound reading on this subject, Cayce observed a man whose transition companions included not only his deceased parents, but also a radiant being he recognized as his own higher self from many lifetimes hence. This future aspect of his consciousness communicated the understanding that death was not an ending but a graduation, a stepping into greater service possibilities that had been prepared through all his earthly experiences. The companions remain with the soul through all three stages of departure, adjusting their assistance to meet the consciousness's needs at each phase. During withdrawal, they offer comfort and recognition. During the threshold pause, they provide wisdom and perspective. During the great release, they serve as bridges between the soul's individual identity and its expanding cosmic consciousness. This understanding transforms grief for those left behind. When someone you love passes peacefully in sleep, know that they were surrounded by profound love, guided by ancient wisdom, and welcomed into dimensions of existence more beautiful than earthly consciousness can imagine. Perhaps the most startling revelation in Cayce's forbidden readings was the discovery that even after clinical death, consciousness retains what he called the sacred pause, a brief window where the soul can still choose whether to continue its journey into expanded dimensions or attempt return to physical embodiment. This choice point, Cayce observed, occurs in the liminal space between the threshold pause and the great release. For souls who die in sleep, this decision is made from a place of profound peace, rather than trauma or fear. The gentle nature of their departure allows consciousness to consider its options with clarity and wisdom rather than panic or confusion. In one documented case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce described following the consciousness of a young mother who passed unexpectedly in her sleep, leaving behind 3 small children. At the choice point, her soul experienced what Cayce called the compassionate review, understanding simultaneously her children's need for their mother and her own soul's completion of its earthly contracts. The choice, Cayce realized, is not made by the personality or ego, but by the soul's highest wisdom in consultation with what he called the Council of Guidance, advanced beings who understand the cosmic implications of each soul's decisions. They showed the young mother how her children's souls had chosen their specific life challenges, including the experience of early loss as part of their own spiritual development. This cosmic Perspective revealed that a tempting return would actually interfere with her children's agreed-upon spiritual curriculum. Her greater service would be performed from higher dimensions, where she could offer guidance and protection in ways impossible during physical embodiment. Understanding this, her soul chose to continue its transition while simultaneously establishing what Cayce called guardian bridges, energetic connections that would allow her continued influence in her children's lives. But not all souls make the same choice. Cayce observed cases where consciousness elected to return, particularly when the soul sensed that important earthly work remained incomplete, or when its departure would create spiritual trauma for loved ones not ready for such loss. These souls often return to their bodies with profound changes in personality, spiritual awareness, and life purpose, explaining many near-death experience transformations. The choice point also explains why some people survive what should have been fatal circumstances. Their souls, having briefly touched the expanded awareness of post-death existence, choose to return with enhanced understanding of their earthly mission and renewed commitment to spiritual growth. For souls who die peacefully in sleep, the choice point becomes an act of ultimate wisdom and compassion. They recognize that their gentle departure is actually their final gift to loved ones, demonstrating that death can be a sacred transition rather than a traumatic rupture, showing through their peaceful passage that consciousness continues beyond physical form. This understanding offers profound comfort to the grieving. When someone you love passes in their sleep, their soul made a conscious choice for the gentlest possible departure, sparing both themselves and their loved ones the trauma of prolonged suffering or sudden shock. Their peaceful transition was their last act of love, choosing grace over drama, serenity over struggle. The choice point reveals death not as something that happens to consciousness, but as something consciousness participates in with full agency and divine wisdom. This knowledge transforms our relationship with mortality from victimhood to partnership with the cosmic order. In his most profound forbidden readings, Cayce witnessed something that would revolutionize understanding of how individual spiritual development affects entire family lineages. Souls who achieve peaceful death in sleep, he discovered, often become healers for their entire ancestral line, sending restoration backward and forward through time in ways that transcend ordinary understanding of causality. From their elevated perspective in higher dimensions, these souls can perceive the energetic patterns that have moved through their family system across generations. They see how unresolved traumas, unexpressed griefs, and unconscious fears have created recurring cycles of suffering that affect descendant after descendant. But more remarkably, they gain the ability to intervene in these patterns from outside linear time. In one preserved case from the ARE archives, Cayce described following the soul of an elderly grandfather who passed peacefully in his sleep after a lifetime of alcoholism and family conflict. In higher dimensions, his consciousness could finally perceive how his addiction had been an unconscious attempt to numb ancestral trauma, grief, and rage that had passed through his lineage for over 2 centuries. From his expanded awareness, this grandfather's soul could see that his great-great-grandfather had experienced profound loss during wartime, creating a wound that had echoed through each subsequent generation as depression, addiction, and relationship difficulties. But now, from beyond physical limitations, his soul could offer healing to that original wound. Cayce observed this grandfather's consciousness, traveling backward through time to embrace his ancestral predecessor, offering the love and understanding that had been missing from that original traumatic experience. As this healing occurred, energetic shifts rippled forward through time, affecting every descendant who carried that wounded pattern. Living family members often experience these healings as sudden spiritual awakenings, spontaneous emotional releases, or the mysterious resolution of long-standing family conflicts. Children and grandchildren of peacefully departed souls sometimes report dreams where their deceased loved one appears to offer forgiveness, understanding, or guidance that transforms their entire approach to life. But the healing influence extends beyond past trauma into future preparation. Cayce discovered that souls established in higher dimensions can perceive the spiritual challenges that future generations will face and send strengthening energies forward through time to assist them. This explains why some families experience what researchers call genetic spiritual awakening, successive generations showing increasing spiritual awareness, psychic sensitivity, or capacity for service to others. Often this acceleration can be traced to an ancestor who achieved peaceful death and dedicated their expanded consciousness to their lineage's spiritual evolution. The process requires the departed soul's conscious choice to serve as an ancestral healer, rather than simply enjoying the blissful freedom of expanded dimensions. Not all souls make this choice, but those who do often have experienced enough family-related pain during their earthly life to feel deeply motivated to heal these patterns for future generations. From the perspective of those still incarnate, this creates a profound reframe of family difficulties. The alcoholism, the depression, the relationship conflicts, the recurring patterns of struggle, these may all be part of a larger healing process that culminates when a family member achieves enough spiritual development to pass peacefully and serve as an ancestral healer. This understanding brings sacred meaning to difficult family experiences and offers hope that current struggles are preparing future generations for greater spiritual freedom and consciousness. The boundary between physical and spiritual existence, Cayce discovered, becomes most permeable in the first 40 days following a peaceful sleep transition. During this period, which he called the adjustment phase, the departed soul maintains what he described as gossamer connections to the earthly dimension, creating unprecedented opportunities for communication with those left behind. These connections are not random spiritual phenomena, but represent a cosmic mercy, the universe's provision for both the departed soul and surviving loved ones to complete unfinished emotional and spiritual business. The soul, now expanded beyond physical limitations, but still carrying love and concern for earthly relationships, can offer guidance, comfort, and closure through subtle but unmistakable communications. In one documented case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce described the experience of a woman whose husband had passed peacefully in his sleep. During the 40-day bridge period, she began receiving what she initially dismissed as coincidences. His favorite song playing at precisely moments when she needed comfort, finding meaningful objects in impossible locations, and experiencing dreams so vivid and coherent that they felt like actual visits. Cayce's reading revealed that these were indeed authentic communications. Her husband's consciousness, still maintaining partial connection to the earthly dimension, was working through the universal forces that govern synchronicity and dream states to offer comfort and guidance during her grief process. But effective communication during this bridge period requires specific conditions from those still in physical form. The grieving must maintain what Cayce called open receptivity without desperate clinging. Excessive grief attempts to force communication or refusal to accept the soul's transition can actually interfere with these natural connections. The departed soul faces a delicate balance during this period. Too much focus on earthly connections can delay their spiritual adjustment to expanded dimensions. Too little attention to surviving loved ones can leave important healing work incomplete. This is why many communications come through dreams, where the conscious mind's resistance is minimized and the heart can receive comfort directly. Cayce observed that souls who achieved peaceful death in sleep are particularly adept at these communications because their transition occurred without trauma or confusion. They retain clear awareness of their earthly relationships while simultaneously expanding into higher consciousness, creating ideal conditions for bridging between dimensions. The most profound communications often involve what Cayce called spiritual downloads, moments when surviving loved ones suddenly understand something they had never grasped before. They might finally comprehend why certain life events occurred, receive insight about their own spiritual path, or gain clarity about decisions they need to make. These understandings arrive with such completeness and certainty that they feel like gifts from beyond. However, Cayce warned that not all spiritual communications during this period come from loved ones. The borderland dimensions contain various entities and influences, some benevolent, others less so. This is why he emphasized the importance of what he called spiritual discernment, evaluating communications based on their fruits rather than their impressive nature. Authentic communications from peacefully departed souls always carry the energy signature of love, healing, and guidance toward spiritual growth. They offer comfort without creating dependency, provide insight without undermining personal responsibility, and inspire hope without denying the reality of loss. As the 40-day bridge period concludes, these direct communications typically fade as the soul fully adjusts to its expanded existence in higher dimensions. But the healing and understanding received during this time creates permanent changes in surviving loved ones, often marking the beginning of their own spiritual awakening or deepened commitment to conscious living. In his most sobering forbidden readings, Cayce revealed dire warnings about attempts to interfere with souls who are peacefully transitioning in their sleep. Excessive grief, desperate prayers for return, or medical interventions that trap consciousness in failing bodies can create what he called spiritual trauma that echoes across multiple lifetimes. This knowledge particularly troubled Cayce because it challenged common assumptions about fighting death and never giving up hope. He discovered that there are circumstances when love requires letting go, when the most compassionate response to a soul's departure is blessing rather than desperate attempts at retention. In one preserved case from the ARE archives, Cayce described the tragic consequences of a family's refusal to accept their grandmother's peaceful transition. As she lay dying in her sleep, natural and serene, her children surrounded her bed with desperate prayers, bargaining with divine forces and demanding that she return to them. Their grief, though understandable, created what Cayce called energetic anchors that prevented her soul from completing its natural departure process. The result was a prolonged dying process, marked by confusion, agitation, and what appeared to be suffering. Her consciousness, already partially separated from her body, was pulled back into physical form that could no longer properly support it. Cayce observed her soul becoming increasingly distressed as it experienced the conflicting pulls of natural spiritual evolution and desperate human attachment. Even more troubling were the long-term consequences. Cayce's reading revealed that this forced return created karmic patterns that would affect not only her soul in future lifetimes, but also the family members whose desperate clinging had interfered with natural spiritual laws. Their inability to release with love would manifest as future experiences where they themselves would face similar spiritual tests. The signs that a soul is ready for its transition, according to Cayce's readings, are unmistakable to those who understand spiritual dynamics. The person begins speaking of deceased loved ones as if they were present. They lose interest in earthly concerns and seem to be listening to sounds others cannot hear. Their sleep becomes deeper and more extended, and they often express a sense of anticipation or readiness. Most significantly, their dying process remains peaceful and natural. Pain diminishes rather than increases. Consciousness drifts gently rather than fighting to remain. These are spiritual communications that the soul has completed its earthly contracts and is ready for graduation to expanded service in higher dimensions. Medical interventions during these natural transitions require careful spiritual discernment. Cayce distinguished between treatments that support the body's natural processes and those that force continued functioning when the soul has already begun its departure. The key question is not whether intervention is medically possible, but whether it serves the soul's highest good. But perhaps most importantly, Cayce revealed the healing practice of sacred release, the art of loving someone enough to bless their transition rather than demanding their continued presence. This requires recognizing that our loved one's peaceful death might be their greatest spiritual achievement, the culmination of lifetimes of growth toward the ability to release physical attachment with grace. Families who practice sacred release often report that their loved one's actual departure becomes luminous, marked by visible peace, sometimes even expressions of joy or wonder. The room fills with palpable love, and surviving family members experience the transition as a completion rather than a rupture. This practice doesn't eliminate grief. That would be neither natural nor healthy, but it transforms grief from desperate clinging into sacred appreciation, from bitter loss into grateful celebration of a soul's evolutionary achievement. Through his forbidden readings, Cayce discovered specific practices that ensure a graceful sleep-death transition when your own time comes. These are not morbid preparations, but life-enhancing disciplines that deepen spiritual awareness while simultaneously preparing consciousness for its eventual graduation from physical embodiment. The foundation of this preparation is what Cayce called death literacy, developing such deep understanding of the transition process that fear dissolves into anticipation of reunion with your eternal nature. This begins with meditation practices that familiarize consciousness with the sensation of moving beyond physical boundaries. Cayce recommended a specific meditation technique he called soul release practice. Each night before sleep, after your body has settled and your mind has quieted, imagine your consciousness gently lifting from your physical form. Feel yourself rising above your body, still connected by the silver cord, but experiencing the freedom of expanded awareness. Practice moving through this borderland dimension, meeting your spiritual guides, and accessing the peace that exists beyond physical concerns. This nightly practice serves multiple purposes. It develops comfort with the sensation of consciousness separating from body, reduces the fear that often accompanies dying, and strengthens your connection with spiritual guides who will assist in your eventual transition. Most importantly, it transforms death from an unknown terror into a familiar journey. But preparation extends beyond meditation to what Cayce called karma completion work. During his readings, he observed that souls who die peacefully in sleep have typically resolved their major karmic entanglements with other souls. This doesn't require perfection, but it does require sincere efforts at forgiveness, both giving and receiving. Cayce recommended creating what he called a forgiveness inventory, honestly examining relationships where resentment, guilt, or unfinished business might create spiritual anchors that could complicate your transition. This work involves reaching out for healing conversations when possible, writing letters that may never be sent but clear your own energy, and most importantly, developing compassion for your own imperfections and mistakes. The practice of blessing release prepares you to approach your own death with grace. This involves regularly contemplating your earthly attachments, possessions, roles, even relationships, and practicing the art of appreciating them fully while holding them lightly. Cayce observed that souls who die peacefully have learned to love without possessing, to care without clinging. Perhaps most importantly, Cayce emphasized developing a clear sense of spiritual purpose that extends beyond physical death. Souls who transition gracefully understand that their earthly experience has been preparation for expanded service in higher dimensions. They approach death not as an ending, but as a promotion, a graduation to greater opportunities for healing and helping others. This preparation also includes practical elements. Cayce recommended creating what modern hospice workers call advanced spiritual directives, clear communications to family members about your wishes regarding end-of-life care, your understanding of when prolonged medical intervention serves your highest good versus when it interferes with natural spiritual processes. But the most profound preparation is cultivating the quality of consciousness that Cayce called eternal perspective. This means gradually shifting your identity from the temporary personality that has lived this particular lifetime to the eternal soul that has existed before and will continue after this physical experience. Daily practices that support this preparation include gratitude for the gift of embodiment, regular communion with your spiritual guides, study of spiritual traditions that offer wisdom about consciousness and death, and service to others that develops the love and compassion that smooth all spiritual transitions. Souls who die peacefully in their sleep, Cayce revealed through his most profound readings, rarely do so by chance. Their gentle departure represents what he called karmic completion, a cosmic recognition that the soul has fulfilled its earthly contracts with particular grace and wisdom. This understanding completely reframes peaceful death from random biological event to spiritual achievement. The soul that passes quietly in sleep has often spent lifetimes developing the consciousness necessary to release physical attachment without struggle, fear, or regret. In one documented case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce explored the spiritual history of an elderly woman who passed serenely in her sleep after a lifetime dedicated to caring for others. His reading revealed that across multiple incarnations, her soul had been learning the delicate balance between loving service and healthy detachment. In previous lifetimes, her compassion had sometimes created karmic entanglements, excessive attachment to those she helped, or attempts to carry others' spiritual burdens as her own. Through this current lifetime, she had finally mastered what Cayce called divine service, offering love and assistance while honoring others' spiritual autonomy. This mastery had cleared her karmic slate, allowing her soul to complete its earthly education with distinction. The grace required for peaceful death, Cayce discovered, involves the integration of multiple spiritual qualities developed across numerous lifetimes. Compassion must be balanced with wisdom. Love must be tempered with non-attachment. Service to others must be grounded in clear understanding of spiritual boundaries and individual soul responsibility. Souls achieving this integration often exhibit what observers describe as luminous aging, rather than becoming bitter or fearful as physical capacities decline. They radiate increasing peace, wisdom, and acceptance. Their presence becomes healing to others, as if they've become transparent to higher spiritual frequencies. But karmic completion doesn't require perfection in the ordinary sense. Cayce observed that souls who die peacefully often carry forward unhealed wounds, unfinished business, or areas where they fell short of their own ideals.